We've got Paul Joseph Watson on the line from the UK. We're going to be talking to Jakari Jackson in just a few minutes, giving us a live report from the coast of California. Leanne McAdoo is going to be joining us later in the show from Austin at a hunger strike being conducted by some activists trying to stop the fluoridation of water here in the UK. And, of course, Anthony Gucciardi is going to be joining us to talk about Fukushima and radiation also in the show. But right now we've got Paul Joseph Watson on, and we've been talking about the article that just went up on Drudge Report, our article that you wrote, Paul, 1,400% radiation hotspot found on a San Francisco beach. We were just told by Kit Daniels that their first reading that the InfoWars crew took out there was 10 times normal. Now, you also broke a story about 14 million dosages of potassium iodide being ordered by the government, and they want it in just 30 days. That was kind of interesting finding.
Yeah, they're on it before the end of February.
That's right.
And people have questioned that because, you know, US public health authorities have been caught lying on a regular basis for decades and decades. And you can go back to atomic soldiers. You can go back to the EPA in the weeks after 9/11 saying that the asbestos-laden air was safe to breathe, which led to, you know, 20,000 people getting debilitating illnesses, many dying. That's why people don't trust the government in terms of public health crises, because they've been caught lying on many occasions.
Well, and of course, Anthony Gucciardi called up the representative from the government that was in charge of this purchasing order and asked him why they were doing that. And the guy beat around the bush and ultimately hung up on Anthony, wouldn't give him an answer.
He didn't seem too keen to talk about it, did he?
No.
First, he said they were just stockpiling it for some unknown reason. Then when Fukushima was brought into the occasion, he went kind of quiet. So people have questioned that, just like they've questioned, you know, the government buying the ammunition and the bullets, because they said, we buy it in bulk to save money. But in the case of the bullets, they were buying hollow point rounds, which cost a lot more than normal full metal jackets and are not suitable for training purposes. So again, they pulled the same excuse with the potassium iodide, saying we're buying it in bulk to save money. And people don't trust that because they've been caught lying on that before. But with Fukushima, again, you know, I'm not a scientist. I read a lot of polarizing stuff on both sides of the equation. Some people say it's a dire threat to humanity. Then others, mainly government spokespeople and officials, say it's completely harmless. I mean, there was a story out of Deep Sea News, which I think was one of the publications that attacked us, that said, quote, it's not even dangerous to swim off the coast of Fukushima. Well, I'd like to see them, you know, go and send their kids into the waters off Fukushima to prove that point, because, you know, thyroid cancers amongst Japanese children are astronomical now, so the effects are already being felt there. And
that's why you want to get. That's why you want to get iodine. That protects your thyroid cancer. Is one of the most common ways that you're going to get cancer from exposure to radiation, because the thyroid is going to soak that up. We got pushed back on from that same article, probably Deep Sea News, because we reported observations that were made by the National Academy of Sciences in a paper there, and they said, well, that's just one place. This is real, and you're taking that all out of context, because that was all about global warming, and it's like, well, first of all, the observation said that it wasn't just at that one station. It was consistent with other readings that they had gotten in the Pacific Ocean. But then to say that, well, that was just one station, we're talking about global warming. Well, then, if you're thinking about something that's global, wouldn't you think that it would be seen all over the place, not just in the Pacific Ocean, but in other oceans as well? And this is a very unusual event. And so you look at something that's an anomaly like that. This was like the highest amount of dead sea creatures that they had seen covering the ocean floor in 24 years of observation. It had gone from a typical 1% to 98%. They said, well, we have these snows that happen from plankton occasionally, but yet they look at something that's really unusual like that. And unless they can tie it into a government grant for global warming, they're not interested in investigating it and seeing what's there. You know, correlation to the location doesn't prove causality. But when you see massive events like this, canaries in a coal mine, you really ought to ask yourself what's going on here. Whether it's Fukushima or something else, you need to know.
Everything we said came true. Everything we've done's been right.
Welcome back to the Alex Jones Show. I'm David Knight filling in for Alex. We've got Paul Joseph Watson on the phone from the UK. We've been talking about his article that's on the Drudge Report right now. 1,400% increase in radiation found near some San Francisco beaches, and we've got our InfoWars crew out there right now to take their own measurements, and our first reports are that first place they went to take readings, they got a reading that was 10 times normal of background radiation, which is about 30 counts per minute. They took a reading there. We're going to be joined by Jakari Jackson in just a few minutes with a live report from there. But, Paul, talking about this particular case here that you've got with the article, one of the things that really stuck out to me about it is that whether or not it's radiation from Fukushima or whether or not it's a concentration, as they point out, of radium and thorium, it's still dangerous if it's in a high concentration like that. And we were just talking about how the government is not interested in investigating this. When they went out and looked at the first reports of a 500% increase, the local government official said, well, it was probably just some red-painted disposable eating utensils. That was the most ridiculous thing I've ever seen. Do you have any idea if he was being sarcastic or laughing about that? What's the context of that? I mean,
from my reading of it, it appeared as if he was being serious. But you know, now they're saying the guy who designed the Geiger counters, you know, the big company owner is saying that this is dangerous to babies and young children. So
yes.
the local government initially dismissed it. Now they're saying it could be dangerous. But a very important article for people to go and read is called "The Ocean is Broken." It came out of the Newcastle Herald, and this was about a yachtsman named Ivan McFadden. And basically, he sailed from Japan all the way to San Francisco. And, you know, this is not coming out of InfoWars. This is not from environmentalists. It's not from government scientists. It's from a guy who's seen it with his own eyes. He was in the same area 10 years before, only had to throw his net in the sea to get a ton of fish. He went back there, sailed from Osaka to San Francisco. And this is what he said. This was after Fukushima. He sailed in April last year. He said, "After we left Japan, it felt as if the ocean itself was dead. We hardly saw any living things. We saw one whale sort of rolling helplessly on the surface with what looked like a big tumor on its head. It was pretty sickening." Quote, "I've done lots of miles on the ocean in my life, and I'm used to seeing turtles, dolphins, sharks, big flurries of feeding birds. But this time, for 3,000 nautical miles, there was nothing alive to be seen." And he concludes by saying, "The ocean is broken." Basically said the only thing he saw was piles of debris from the tsunami, you know, bits of cars, bits of houses. All the ocean life, all the way from Japan to San Francisco, was basically dead for 3,000 nautical miles.
Wow. And that kind of correlates with what we saw in that report from some readings that were taken by the Monterey Maritime Institute there and was published in the National Academy of Sciences, saying that at one particular station, they saw an increase in dead sea creatures on the ocean floor from 1% to 98% coverage of the floor. And they said that there were other stations that were giving them similar readings. It was the highest readings that they had seen, the highest coverage of dead sea life that they had seen in 24 years of observation. Now, they were saying it was global warming, although global warming isn't happening. It's not just that we're having a cold winter right now. This is a 17-year trend. We're not talking about one event of an extremely cold, record-breaking winter in North America. We're talking about 17 years of data that does not support global warming. And yet, if the observations that they have there, everything has to be tied back to global warming because that's where they get their research grants. That's where they get their funding. And so they push back on that. But nobody is really looking at why this is happening. And they're not looking at the plausibility that this is radioactive material that's been leaked out in massive quantities from Fukushima now going on. We're coming up almost to 3 years in just a couple of months that this has been going on. You would expect that to have some effect. And that's apparently what this guy is observing as he goes across the Pacific Ocean.
Well, and part of the reason is that the fish eat plankton, don't they? And all the studies from around Hawaii and other areas, Canada as well, have shown that the fish have got abnormally very high levels of cesium-137, which is from the reactors in Fukushima. They did a study of the fish that Japan was selling to Canada and found that 90% and up of most of the fish had very high percentages of cesium-137 in their system. And this was around about a year ago now. So the fish are eating all that plankton, which is poisoned by this cesium-137. And then people who venture across the ocean say that there's nothing there. It's all dead. Then you get reports, which you just mentioned, about, in certain areas, 98% of the sea life is dead. You've got reports of starfishes melting, sea lion cubs dying in unusual numbers. Even in Utah, you've got bald eagles dying that some people are linking to Fukushima. So there's a mass die-off of sea life. But again, government says nothing to worry about, move along, nothing to see here, just as they did after 9/11 with the EPA saying, the air was safe to breathe.
That's
then
right.
you've got in the week
it fits their agenda. They've got an agenda that they want to push, and they're not interested in looking at anything that falls outside of that agenda. And they're not interested in looking at anything that affects the health of the public either.
Well, in their eyes, they would say we don't want to cause panic, but that's proven very dangerous in the past. It's killed people. I mean, the EPA immediately after Fukushima turned off most of their radiation detectors. They raised the safe level of radiation, certain types of it, by 100,000 times.
But it isn't just that they don't want to panic the public, because they do want to panic the public when it suits their purposes. You've got the EPA going before congressional testimony saying that particulate matter is the leading cause of death, that it's higher than cancer even, and then turning around a few months later and exposing people to levels that the EPA says are 70 to 80 times levels that the EPA said were safe levels. So they will deliberately try to create a panic. They'll try to create a panic with their testimony. Then they'll even expose people to dangerous levels of something in order to create further panic. So there's a different agenda that's going on here.
Well, they choose which issues to create panic around, don't they? Yep. If there's an opportunity to centralize power and to make a ton of money, then they're going to create panic around it. I mean, look at global warming, look at terrorism. If it's in their interest, they will create the panic. Then if you've got a real threat, they will say, we don't want to create a panic, let's downplay it. And exactly. It's a genuine threat. So.
That's right. That's right. I think we've got Jakari Jackson on the line. Do we have him, guys? Is he's there? Okay, good. Let's go to Jakari Jackson. He's on the coast of California with the InfoWars crew, and they've been out there with a Geiger counter taking some measurements. What do you see, Jakari?
Hey, how you doing, David? There's a lot of radiation out here. I'll say I'm a little bit concerned. We're a little bit southwest of San Francisco, south of Pillar Point Harbor on Surfers Beach. That's what the locals referred to. And you guys remember the viral video that's on Infowars.com. A man came out here with his own professional-grade Geiger counter. We have one as well, and we'll show you those readings here in a second. But when the man came out here, he saw radiation levels well in excess of what's considered to be normal out here. A normal, according to the Half Moon Bay Review, is around 30 CPM. Just in a little bit of time we've been here, we've found things close to 300, and that's just in a small section of the beach. We'll go down and show you more of that here in a little bit. But this is nothing to scoff at. People are saying, various experts in the radiation fields, they're saying that this isn't cesium-137 and maybe things such as radium. And, that very well could be the case, but it's very much in excess of what's considered to be normal. And also Steve Weiss, he's an electrical engineer who's been making Geiger counters for nearly 40 years. He came out here with his Geiger counter and found radiation levels in excess of 400 CPM, keeping in mind that the normal, according to the Half Moon Bay Review, is around 30, David.
So are you at the same beach that Steve Weiss went to and he found the 1,400% increase? Is it also the same beach that somebody else found a 500% increase?
That the gentleman went to in the YouTube video. I believe Steve Weiss, he was around the same area, yes.
Okay, all right. Yeah, people should be concerned about that because you know what? Radiation is radiation. We have, just to say that it's radium is still dangerous. Radon gas can increase the risk of lung cancer as well. And we have had a report from Tully Blackwood that up in McClellan Air Force Base, which they decommissioned just outside of Sacramento, they had a huge amount of radium that they had used for illuminated dials in aircraft instruments, and it was leftover material. They had this massive mound of dirt. And the local government there in Sacramento, as well as the state government, said, you can't just leave that here. It's going to leach into the ground. It's going to get into groundwater. And they were pushing back on that. The Air Force didn't want to pay to move that. And eventually they just buried it there while people were still talking about it. I'll tell you,
David, just a moment ago, we were talking to one of the locals here, and she was telling us about barrels that were dumped somewhere around this location. And she's concerned that maybe that's the cause for the radiation. Now, she's not, so much willing to pull up stakes and move. She wants an investigation to be done, and that's why we're here. It's Surface Beach, but maybe we can pan around and give them a shot. There are no surfers out here. I think I saw one a little bit ago, but now they're pretty much gone.
Yeah.
So even Surfers Beach, there's no surfers at Surfers Beach.
Well, see, that's just the thing. I mean, when people go out and they take these readings and they get really high readings, the government's not really interested. And just as we saw at McClellan Air Force Base, sometimes it's the government themselves that's putting the radioactive material out there. You know, whether it's cesium-137 from Fukushima or whether it's radium from an Air Force base where they were using it in paint, still, radiation is dangerous in large amounts. It accumulates, and that's why...
You can get radiated by the sun. You don't want to be outside all day.
That's right. But, you know, it's cumulative. And when you see these kinds of increases, first of all, the government really ought to be concerned about it. But if the government's not going to be concerned about it, the people need to understand what's going on about it. And ultimately, just like fluoride, where you have to take care of yourself, you have to get a fluoride filter, you also need to be aware of how to protect yourself from this with something like Survival Shield, you know, getting a good source of clean, pure iodine like that. And that's really, ultimately, you're responsible for yourself. You're responsible for educating yourself. And you're responsible for taking the measurements to protect yourself and your family. Hang on, Jakari. We're getting ready to go to a break. We'll come back to you. Want to find out what's going on there and where you guys are going to be headed next, because we've got the InfoWars crew out on the west coast of California. And not just California. I think they're going up a little bit higher. We'll talk to him about where they're going to go. Looking at this, looking to see if there are effects coming from Fukushima.
The facts are in. The studies are legion. Sodium fluoride and other toxic members of the fluoride family are devastating the health and cognitive ability of the American people. So why are the social engineers adding it to the water? Simple. Dumb down the host population that the parasitic technocracy is feeding on. We may not have been able to get fluoride out of the water supply yet, but we can help to get it out of our bodies. I am extremely excited to announce the exclusive InfoWars Life Fluoride Shield formulation, fusing 6 of the best documented ingredients from around the world to help the body remove not just toxic fluoride residues from the body, but a whole host of toxic substances. Let's take a stand against the globalists by blocking their poisons with Fluoride Shield. I use Fluoride Shield every day. Secure your Fluoride Shield and other pioneering formulations at InfoWarsLife.com today. Let's start cleansing our bodies now and support the InfoWar at the same time. That's InfoWarsLife.com.
Welcome back to the Alex Jones Show. We've got Paul Joseph Watson joining us from the UK, as well as the InfoWars crew on the West Coast in California. And Jakari, we were just talking about what you were seeing there at the beach. You've taken some readings that were about 10 times normal background radiation. We had an expert, an electrical engineer who manufactures Geiger counters. He got at that same beach about 1,400% increase. So it's not just you guys as amateurs. You are amateurs out there, but you know how to read a Geiger counter, and certainly the guy who makes them knows how to read them. Where are you guys headed next?
Well, David, we'll finish up here, then we're going to start up the coast. We have a few fish markets we're going to hit. We're going to hit several beaches. We hit one this morning, and we'll show you all those reports. We're going to go down to the sand and show you guys the readings that we got a little bit ago. We'll put up a video straight to YouTube of when we went down to the sands, and keeping in mind that the normal here is supposedly 30. We got things around 270, 280. So we'll show you all of that. But for right now, in the meantime, we have the guys with the Geiger counter. So I want to take a step over here, David, and see what the guys got. Yeah,
let's take a look at that.
Okay. So we're here with the InfoWars crew, and you can see the shot right here. We have 102.96, well above the told 30, which is to be normal. Tell me your thoughts on this.
Yeah, we've seen readings as high as 100, 120 here, so it's kind of concerning me, you know.
High as 100, 120, 130, and like I said, when we went down below the bluffs, we were hitting around 270. So the InfoWars crew is here. We're keeping an eye on this. We're trying to get the word out to as many people and even ask people what they think it is. You know, some people say it's radioactive barrels or other types of waste that may have been dumped in the sea. We just want to talk to the people, inform the people, and see what they think it is.
Okay. Well, thank you, Jakari. We'll be looking back for your reports. Alex will be back tomorrow, and he'll be talking to you. And, of course, as you said, your reports will be going up on our channel, on our YouTube channel, as well as the nightly news tonight.
On YouTube, as well as PrisonPlanet.tv.
That's right. We'll have some reports tonight. Let's go back to Paul Watson in the UK. Now, Paul, this article that you had about 1,400%, certainly it's something that we should be worried about, whether or not it's from Fukushima. Certainly the guy who's an expert who manufactures Geiger counters, he was worried enough about it to take it back and to do a spectrum analysis. He found that it didn't have cesium-137, which would be the fingerprint showing that it's from man-made radiation source. But if there's a lot of toxic waste that's put out there, just like McClellan Air Force Base just buried their radium waste right there at the Air Force Base over the concerns of the local authorities there, over the state authorities who told them not to do it, they just did it. So the government as well as corporations can just plop out toxic waste like this, and there ought to be a concern about where that's coming from.
Well, yeah, then they lecture us all day about global warming.
Yeah.
But the concern is we don't find out about a lot of this stuff until decades later in some cases. And back in 2011, the New York Academy of Sciences came out with a report that said over the previous 24 years, 1 million people had died as a result of Chernobyl radiation, of course, the nuclear disaster in 1986. Now, studies have shown that Fukushima has released 10 to 100 times the amount of radiation into the ocean compared to Chernobyl. Now, Chernobyl was obviously a different kind of event. Most of the radioactivity was released into the air, into the atmosphere. Mm-hmm. But the fact that it took 24 years to determine that it had been responsible for killing nearly 1 million people. Now, we already see reports of Japanese kids having thyroid cancers, higher thyroid cancers as a result of Fukushima. It's going to take decades before we know for sure, but, you know, this took 24 years to find out that figure of 1 million deaths attributable to Chernobyl. So we don't find out about this stuff until decades later in many cases, which is why we need to be concerned about it now.
That's right. It really bothers me when I see so many of these articles. Well, nobody has died at Fukushima. And it's like, you don't know that, because in most cases, unless somebody gets a massive, massive dose of radiation, if they do, like in a nuclear sub-accident, they can die in a matter of days. But that's not usually the way people die. Usually what you see is an increased amount of birth defects, just like we saw that calf, that sea calf, the whale calf that was a Siamese twin. You see a lot of birth defects. Things like you were talking about, the sailor who traveled across the ocean 3,000 miles, saw a whale with tumor on it, but not much else that was alive out there. So we see it as a gradual increase in the number of cancers that people get. That's the way that it typically happens. It's very dishonest of them to say, well, nobody has died of this yet.
Well, yeah, I mean, it works in slow motion, doesn't it?
Yes.
The same thing happens with everything. If there's not an immediate drastic impact, then people try and dismiss it and downplay it, but it's a long-term concern. And, you know, it's only been, what, 3.5 years since Fukushima happened, so we're gonna be getting more cancers. We're already seeing it in the wildlife, and we're beginning to see it with humans now.
I find it very interesting. There was an article on Drudge about how the Vienna, Austria police went to a dumpster because they got high radiation readings. Turned out to just be some diapers that were contaminated with radioactive iodine from a hospital. But don't you think the government is looking for that in the United States, and maybe they're seeing high levels of radiation and they don't even care enough about us to investigate the source of that? Now you can watch the InfoWars Nightly News streaming live as it happens for free.
Check it out at Infowars.com/show.